Welcome to Trust the Journey. I'm Melanie Curtis.
And I'm Jason Moletsky.
Thank you, legit, for joining us today.
Yeah, our mission is living and learning, laughing and loving together with you.
We're here to grow and contribute through our practice of openness, honesty, vulnerability, humility, and trust, trusting the entire journey.
Yeah, and on that journey, we often talk about plant medicines, psychedelics, and other avenues of healing. When we do, we are sharing for informational purposes only. We're not doctors or therapists, and we don't promote doing anything illegal.
Inside us all, we have a deep, powerful knowing. We encourage curiosity, healing, and exploration of this consciousness.
Damn straight. Together, our handle is trustthejourney.today. Individually, you can find her at melaniecurtis.com and me at jasonmoletsky.com.
Thank you all again so much for being with us. On to the show. Steven Kotler is a New York Times best-selling author and award-winning journalist and the executive director of the Flow Research Collective.
He's one of the world's leading experts on human performance. Steven is the author of 11 bestsellers out of 14 books, including The Art of Impossible, The Future is Faster Than You Think, Stealing Fire, The Rise of Superman, Bold, and Abundance.
His work has been nominated for 3 Pulitzer Prizes, translated into over 50 languages, and has appeared in over 110 publications, including academic journals such as Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews in Psychophysiology, and mainstream publications like the New York Times Magazine, Wired, Atlantic Monthly, Wall Street Journal, Time, and the Harvard Business Review.
Alongside his wife, Joy Nicholson, Kotler is the co-founder of Rancho de Chihuahua, a special needs dog rescue, and the Buddy Sue Hospice Home for Old Dogs, Canine Elderly Care Facility.
Oh, I love that part of Steven's bio. I personally have followed Steven's work for many years. I've read nearly all of his books. I first read Stealing Fire, and most recently I'm telling everybody to read The Art of Impossible. We highly recommend his work and couldn't be more fired up to have him on the show. Steven, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We are thrilled to have you, truly. So glad you're here.
Welcome
My
to the
pleasure.
show.
It's nice to be with you.
Yeah. So where I want to start today is flow state, right? You're the leading expert in this field with all your writing, with all the work that you do with Flow Research Collective. I'm someone who is deeply fascinated by the human experience and personally relentlessly called to my own edges, my own healing, my own expansion, all of that. With that, I'm a voracious consumer of continuing education. I've read a lot of your books. I'm really gotten so much out of your work over the years. So thank you for that. Truly. I say that so everyone can hear me say it and check you out. But relative to flow, for those of the people listening who don't know, what is your view on flow? Like, what is flow to you? And why would you say there's so much value in being able to access it and access it with mastery and regularity?
Short, medium, or long? For your
Yeah,
answer.
I know.
Short, medium, or long?
Short. Yeah.
Short? Okay.
Short.
As short as I can do this, let's just start with the definition of flow. Flow is an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and perform our best. That's not my definition. That's science's definition. It just doesn't get us very far. So more specifically, it's any of those moments of rapt attention and total absorption. You get so focused on what you're doing, so focused on the task at hand, everything else just starts to vanish, right? Your sense of self, self-consciousness, the inner critic voice in your head gets really quiet. Time passes strangely, usually just speeds up, just get so sucked into what you're doing that 5 hours go by in what feels like 5 minutes. Occasionally will slow down, you get a freeze frame effect. And throughout all aspects of performance, physical, mental, and emotional, skyrocket. So why anybody cares about this is everybody on the planet has been optimized for peak performance by evolution. Like it comes built in. We can all get into flow. The state is accessible to all of us. And it takes whatever our skills and our abilities are and amplifies them significantly. The numbers, and we can go into a lot of detail, but the numbers are startling. These are step functions worth of performance gains. And to put that in context, if I run a little self-help business and I can get you a 5% performance improvement that'll stick around for 3 to 6 months, you've got $1 million business right there. Flow, and let's just go with productivity, which is something everybody cares about. McKinsey, the business consultancy, did a 10-year study. It was top executives in flow. They want to know how much more productive they are in flow versus out of flow. On average, it was 500% more productive. Now, it was a self-reported study, so you always got to say, well, grain of salt. But the truth of the matter is that's not, like, we've trained tens and tens of thousands of people around the world, 130 countries. So we have like a global data set of like what works for everybody. And those numbers aren't out of line with like stuff we see. And as you pointed out, this state it's reliable, it's repeatable. This is the work I do, which is on the neurobiology of flow, the neuroscience. What it's given us is, oh, this is where the state comes from in the brain. This is how it works. It feels really weird. It feels like a mystical experience. Doesn't even seem normal sometimes, but no, it turns out it's at the beating heart of human peak performance, and we can all access this state. So that was the short version. How'd I do?
That's pretty good.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Again, buying people into like, why are we talking about this? What's the value there? Yeah, Jay, go ahead.
So I gotta say, like, I'll just go ahead and put all my apples on the table right now. Flow state saved my life, right? So I'm one of the guys in your books, complete adrenaline junkie for my entire life. And I came from a really hard upbringing, and I found flow as a place to escape the noise in my head and a place to quiet down all that, the chatter and the stuff that was going on in there that I didn't want to think about, pain I didn't want to feel anymore. And flow state, and specifically, learning that through paddling initially in my canoe, then into motorcycles and bicycles, and then skydiving. And skydiving was the great big curve off into the world of air sports, where that ultimate presence is so mandatory, right? Like we're in an environment where we don't naturally exist. And so it requires our complete presence to the moment. And as you're saying, like while we're learning something, we don't experience this, right? We're stumbling, we're falling, we're trying to get that, but it's not there. But once we've adapted as a skill, now we shift into a different mode of consciousness. And I just want to say I'm super excited to have a conversation with somebody who's had this depth of study on the topic, because it's been such a vital component to my entire existence. So tell me about the question I want to pose is, tell me about the what is this? It's like the toll gates of moving from learning into actually executing flow. What's going on in the mind, in the brain?
Learning meaning skill acquisition.
I agree. Yes.
You want to understand the transition from skill to actually flow.
Okay, I want to learn to be able to get to flow sooner myself instead of stumbling slow learner, right?
Got it. So there are sort of two things you need to know. Let's start with the most basic, which is flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. About 28 have been discovered. There's way more, right? That's just what we've found so far. And that's probably more a comment on our ability to measure anything than flow itself. But what we've learned is that flow follows focus. It only shows up when all of our attention is in the right here, right now. So that's what flow's triggers do. They drive our attention into the present moment. Now, I said there were 28 of them. They actually come in two varieties. There's individual flow, me in a flow state, right? Or Melanie in a flow state. And then there's group flow, which is all of us in a flow state together. And group flow comes at scales, right? Like interpersonal flow is Jason and me and I lost in a conversation for 2 hours and we didn't notice, right? Group
Yep.
flow is, people skydiving in formation, right? You
Yep.
can't really do that without group flow. So it's perfectly executed team performance. You can go up in scale. Communitas is group flow at scale. It's a political rally. It's a rock concert. Everybody's merged with the band and clapping along in sync. So 16, 17 of the triggers are on the group flow side. Let's ignore those. Let's talk about your experiences with action sports. There are a bunch of individual triggers. They all work by driving attention to the present moment. They do that neurobiologically different ways. They can amplify the production of dopamine or norepinephrine, which are feel-good neurochemicals that amplify performance and excitement and things like that. Or they can lower cognitive load, which is all the crap you're trying to think about at any one time. So if I lower your cognitive load, this is what happens when you clean your office, right? You
Yeah.
have your office is a mess and you've got so much shit to do. And the first thing you do is you clean your office and you feel a little bit lighter. That's because you lowered
Yes.
cognitive load, right? So what happens
Yes.
with
Yep.
the brain is the minute you lower cognitive load, the brain goes, okay, cool. I've got all this extra energy. Where do I put it? And you start focusing on the task at hand. So all the flow triggers, that's what they do. So let's talk about action sports, your background. Why do action sports work so well? Among those flow triggers, novelty, complexity, unpredictability, risk. These are all flow triggers. Okay. We'll come to, there's more going on in action sports, but all of these triggers, all of these things drive dopamine into our system. So I can give you examples from, let's just talk about novelty for a second. So
You got the one I wanted to
I'll
talk
start it.
about.
I'll give you
That
an
was it.
athletic example, and I'll give you a
Yeah.
business example. Okay. So novelty is a flow trigger. When I'm skiing and I can't get into flow and I'm blocked and I'm blocked and I'm blocked and I can't push any harder, you know what I mean? And I'm frustrated. I will go find a part of a mountain that I've never seen before or
Mm,
rarely go. And then I will go ski lines that I've never ever skied before. And usually
nice.
I'll actually dial the challenge back a little bit, mellow it out a little bit, but just use the novelty to produce a lot of dopamine. Dopamine will drive focus and it'll lead me closer to flow. Then I just start stacking other flow triggers on top of that. And we can talk about more about what that looks like. Let me just talk about novelty in some non-athletic environments for people who are listening. So in a large scale business context, when Steve Jobs built Pixar, he was very interested in flow and wanted to use flow to amplify creativity, which it does. Studies done by my organization, done at Harvard, at the University of Sydney, finds that creativity and innovation, and I could define what I mean by those terms if you want, but let's just say creativity and innovation for now, amplify 400 to 700% in flow. It's a huge uptick in flow, and Pixar depended upon that creativity to write great scripts, to win Oscars, to do all that stuff. So Steve, when he built Pixar, he designed it so wherever you went, you'd have to go through this huge atrium in the center, and people would have to bump into one another, right? There's a famous story, and it amplifies the amount of novelty and unpredictability,
Yeah.
both of which are flow triggers, right? And people bump into each other. Suddenly, a guy from marketing is talking to a woman from sales who's talking to a film director. And those people normally, in most film companies, they're balkanized. They're in different spots, so they never cross pollinate. But the novelty in these conversations sparks ideas, sparks flow, drives attention, drives focus. And, the result was a lot of Oscars for Pixar. What does that look like at a really smaller level for me? I have to read a lot of neuroscience textbooks to do my job. And you might imagine they're thrilling.
Thrilling.
But I want to be in flow when I'm reading them because flow amplifies learning rates, skyrockets.
Yeah.
And the Department of Defense found soldiers in flow learn 240 to 500% faster than normal in skills acquisition. So that's another of these huge step functions worth of difference. And you want to learn and flow. So I'll run a hotel room with a beautiful balcony view of like mountains I've never seen before and sit out there and read. And I'm sort of leveraging the novelty of the environment and the unpredictability of being in a new place to just give me a little more dopamine. And,
Yep.
or when I was in grad school and I was studying writing, you know what I mean? I would go to cafes and write because just the stimulation, the extra novelty, right? these are how you sort of work with the flow triggers. I'll stop there. There's way more flow triggers
Yeah.
we can talk about, but let me just pause
I
there.
know. We could go on and on about the flow triggers. God, it's fascinating. I mean, that alone is so much value for people to take away and just be like, oh, okay, I could actually introduce simply a new experience, and this is going to add more potential for me to access flow.
Melanie, we all know this experience. Like everybody gets into flow when they travel, right?
Correct.
Provided you're not super hungover the entire time, and even then you still probably figure it out sometimes, right? But travel is one of the flowiest activities on earth. And by the way, flow is a really addictive state, right? It's the most pleasurable state on earth. It underpins well-being and happiness and overall life satisfaction. And I always think about this because it's very addictive. We'll chase flow. And think about how many vacations you've planned meticulously that have not sort of worked. And you keep doing it anyways. You'll keep. Why is that? Because like if you get one that generates a shitload of flow, it's the anchor experience of a lifetime. Like you remember it forever and you talk about it for decades. So we chase these experiences.
Yeah, which is partly why Jason and I both are professional skydivers. We are both in action sports. We know a lot of people that you talk about in your books because of that connection to action sports and skydiving. But one of the threads for me is I, deeply love people. And I'm always very curious. And that's something we do on this show too, is we're curious. You have all these accolades. You've done so much with your life and your professional life. And we're curious about the person that you are. So I want to know what was the impetus behind you learning about flow, and what has helped you, or what has been the driving motivation for you personally to go in such a committed sense toward this one area. I'm very curious about that, and as your personal story versus the more of the
again
detailed
long, medium,
information.
or short. Long, medium, or short.
I know. Medium.
Okay, so then it was really an intersection of two things that happened. The first is that when I came out of graduate school and into the world of journal, I started out as a journalist. That was my first career. I was writing on books already at the time, but I became a journalist, and I really I was fascinated by two things: neurobiology. This was in the sort of the late 80s, the early 90s, and neuroscience. I was always a little bit of a science geek, but neuroscience went through this transition from talking about shit that nobody cared about. Like, what does this cluster of neurons in this region of the brain possibly maybe do? And we had a single neuron level. So I was studying neuroscience. I'm slapping Jason's face. Maybe. We went from like, what is this cluster of neurons doing, to like, what are emotions? What are states of consciousness, right? What is consciousness? What are altered states of consciousness, including flow, like all this stuff? It was taboo in science. You couldn't even ask these questions. I mean, literally, like I dropped out of the University of Wisconsin undergraduate because nobody would talk about these kinds of topics. You had to go elsewhere. It's actually funny. Richie Davidson was at the University of Wisconsin, who pioneered meditation research. And if I would have found him, I probably wouldn't have left. I ended up going back and finishing my degrees there. But like, I was frustrated. I was like, where's all this stuff I want to study? And suddenly you could talk about it, and neuro was doing it. So I was really into neuro. And as a writer, it was an uncolonized territory. There was nobody in America who was really like, journalists wrote about psychology, they didn't write about neurobiology. So like there was nobody else doing it. And simultaneously, I was, as you guys pointed out, I'm a total action sports fanatic. And I was, part of my life was spent in what was then Squaw Valley and now is, Palisades, Tahoe. And I was living there for all the winters and writing about action sports, right? This was sort of the birth of action sports. It's a punk rock deep subculture. The X Games hasn't really happened. The Gravity Games, right? Like, and it's a deep punk subculture. And none of the action sport athletes will even talk to most journalists, right? But I'm a punk rocker with a mohawk or dreadlocks. They'll all talk to me because I look like them. And what started to happen, if you know anything about action sports in the 90s, it's the era of impossible, more impossible feats, things that had never been done, were never supposed to be done, that were supposed to kill us. got done than ever before. It's this incredible explosion of performance. And as the journalists, right, you're on the sidelines, we're all talking. We're like, this level of performance is insane. We got to hit a
Yeah.
limit. Like, people are supposed to be dead by now. What's going on? And every year we'd get together and it was more and more and more. And now we know, literally, it's considered the era of impossible. It's like in the record book,
Wow.
more wild shit happened then. And it was surfing and skiing and rock climbing and snowboarding and all the like. And I can go into examples, but I'm guessing your audience sort of knows about what happened in the 90s in action sports. But I was paying a lot of attention because, one, if you're interested in human performance, which I was, and I was interested in using neuroscience to decode human performance, what I was seeing didn't make any sense. And the main reason it didn't make any sense is, if you know anything about the psychology or the history of human performance in the 90s, there were three ideas that were dominant. You had to be able to resist gratification as a kid, right? So that marshmallow test. You had to have great parents and genetics, like the right schools, the right coaches. It was a money game, really. It was like, are your parents nice, and do you have the money for this shit? And this last was like, you need 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, mastery, right?
Yeah.
And it was deliberate practice. You do the same thing over and over. And I'm looking at these action sport athletes and, like, first of all, none of them can delay gratification, right? Like, this is an instant gratification community if you've ever seen one. Second of all, most of the people I knew came from broken homes. They had terrible childhoods. They didn't have any education. They didn't have any fucking money. Pardon my language.
That's fine.
And deliberate practice. What are you kidding? Like, they were action sport athletes. Like, they mobbed down the mountain together. It didn't look like, they were practicing, but like, it didn't look deliberate. The terrain changes on a moment-to-moment basis. How do you even think about what Anders Ericsson was talking about in these environments? So all the normal stuff was out the window, and I was like, well, what the hell is going on here? Can you use neurobiology to decode it? And over time, I discovered that the commonality was all of these athletes had found ways to introduce flow triggers into their life. They didn't even know these were flow triggers, but they built, the way they performed around flow triggers. These communities were prioritizing flow triggers. They were values, right? If you lived in Squaw Valley, risk-taking was a value, was a community value. Creative expression, right? This is the 90s. It's the style session. Is the most creative person down the mountain is suddenly the winner. This is these are all flow triggers. They're driving everybody into flow. And because flow amplifies learning so much, everybody starts feeding off each other, and you get this feedback loop. So that's what I'm seeing. That's part one of the story, but that's really where it starts for me. And then in 2000, I was 30 years old, and I got Lyme disease and spent 3 years in bed and lost everything. Everything.
Wow.
The woman I was going to marry, all the money. I went bankrupt trying to find a cure. I was the first case of Lyme disease on the West Coast, so nobody had a clue what was wrong with me. They thought I had every disease you could possibly imagine. It was a fun house of illness for 3 years. I spent 3 years in bed, and at the end of it, I was just going to kill myself. They had pulled me off drugs. There was nothing anybody could do for me, and I was functional. Maybe an hour a day, maybe. And then the rest of the time I was lying on a couch, and my brain wasn't working. My short-term memory was gone. My long-term memory was gone. I could barely read. I couldn't focus. I was in so much pain I couldn't walk across the room, and I was really considering ending my life. And a friend showed up at my house and demanded that we go surfing. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? I can't walk across the room. We're not going surfing. And she wouldn't leave. And wouldn't leave. And after 3 hours, I was like, what is the worst that could happen? Let's go surfing. And it'd been 5 years since I had been on board, and I was never very good. But she took me to the friendliest, warmest, mellowest beginner wave in Los Angeles. They carried me out to the break and gave me a board the size of a Cadillac. And a couple seconds later, a wave came, and I spun the board around and paddled and popped up to my feet. And I popped up. I knew about flow, but I had experienced low-grade flow states. I had never had a full-blown macro flow experience where you can get out-of-body experiences, which is what I had there. A bunch of really mystical things happen. And we now understand the neurobiology of why that happens, and I can explain all of it. But at the time, I was like, what the hell just happened to me? And it felt delicious. And I caught 4 more waves. And by the 5th wave, I was exhausted, and they brought me home, and they put me in bed, and people had to bring me food for the next 14 days because I couldn't walk. And then at the end of it, 15th day, I caught a ride with a friend and went back to the beach and did it again because the feeling was so
Nice.
delightful. And this was the second thing that happened is like over the course of like 6 to 8 months, I went from like, I'm not functional at all to almost normal. And I didn't know, that didn't make any sense. Like none of this made any sense to me. I thought, first of all, it felt like a mystical experience, and I'm a science guy, so I don't have mystical experiences. So I thought, well, my shit's gotten into my brain. Even though I feel better, I'm probably dying because it's got to be eating away at my brain. That
Right.
they like, I don't have mystical experiences while surfing. That's the flakiest thing I've ever heard. And it was just like so
Yeah.
outside my experience at that time. Anyways, I quickly discovered that that was flow also. And you got to remember,
Yeah.
like, this wasn't like we didn't yet know the neurobiology of the state. So, like, you're working with these squishy psychological definitions. We didn't know yet that flow used to be a mystical experience and that what goes on in the brain are the same. When none of this stuff. So, it took me a really long time to figure out that, holy crap, the same thing the athletes were using to go from zero to Superman just got me from totally broken back to normal. And I
Wow.
realized I was looking at a comprehensive thing. And my work actually started with trying to figure out the neuroimmunology of flow. How could this possibly heal Lyme disease? What the hell was that? And
Right.
that was actually, it took a little while, but actually some of that work had been done by then. And it was known that all the neurochemicals that underpin flow boost the immune system. But more importantly, for an autoimmune disease, which is a nervous system gone haywire, essentially
Hmm.
flow, when you move into the state, um it flushes all the stress hormones out of your system, so all of that stuff leaves, and
Wow.
it allows your system to return to baseline. And more importantly, like an autoimmune condition, is you never are normal, right? Like if you ever had Lyme disease or lupus or MS or any of those things, you wake up and you don't know, am I going to feel good today or am I going to be sick? Like what's going on? Where am I? Am I going to be able to move, or should I start my day, or should I just stay in bed? You answer these questions on a daily basis, hourly basis even. And it's because there's no normal. So your body no longer knows where homeostatic normal is. If
Hmm.
you push all the stress hormones out, your body can reset it normal. So regular being in flow on a regular basis, besides all the stuff that does for mood and depression and all those kinds of things, it helps the nervous system reset towards baseline. And
So I
for
want to
people with
jump in here real
autoimmune
quick.
conditions, yeah,
I
Yeah.
want to take a couple things that you've said there and build off them,
shut me
because
up,
I
please
heard
cut me
some real.
off.
No,
Thank you. I
I
talk
want to
too
hear you
much.
talk more
No, no,
about
no.
some of the very
You go.
specific parts, which is you talked about altered states of consciousness a little bit, and then the word emotions came up, and then the other one that I'm really feeling into is this, like, okay, flow state is the re-regulation of the nervous system, right? And so what I've experienced in my life in ridiculous extreme sports, I mean, I started wingsuiting in the 90s and base jumping in the 90s and been continued to do that for my entire life. And what I've seen in the community of these high adventure athletes is this highly addictive personalities, right? Like just really needing to be in novelty, really needing to be in risk, really needing to be modulating their nervous systems and modulating their emotional bodies through one of these activities that needs to constantly be increasing in intensity in order to be able to have the same kind of effects that it had at the previous time that they've done it. And my personal journey, and I think I can speak for Mel here because we know her so well, is that what this is a kind of an unsustainable thing over time, and that there needs to be some kind of a, like, whoa, if I keep going at this, wide open throttle, I'm going to end up hitting a cliff eventually, or the wave is going to eat me, or I'm just going to destroy my body, you get broken to bits. And so this modulating of the nervous system also seems to be a modulating of the emotional experience of sitting here, just being me and being okay with that. Right. And how do I modulate just being here? So this project of Trust the Journey is essentially an effort to create flow states without the risk of physical injury to the body, but it does have the risk of fumbling the conversation or saying something wrong, or messing up in some way in a public format. So it's high
There's
vulnerability,
risk.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Your brain
risk.
can't tell the difference between social risk, physical risk, and financial risk. Actually, it's all processed.
Financial risk. Oh, gosh.
Structures. Yeah, it's really the same structure. So your brain, it's all basic safety and security stuff. But Jason, to your point, so I've had the privilege of working with a tremendous amount of like retiring professional action sport athletes or retiring Navy SEALs or Rangers or Spec Ops. These are incredibly high flow risk based careers, and risk is a predominant flow trigger. And risk is a really wonky flow trigger. So let me back up. You were talking about the reason you need to keep taking more risks is because of a trigger known, this is the foundational trigger for flow, the challenge skills balance. Flow follows focus. We pay the most attention to the task at hand, what we're doing, when the challenge slightly exceeds our skill set. So you want to stretch but not snap, right? It's usually metaphorically it's about 5% greater. When the challenge is about 5% greater than our skills, that's for most of us, most of the time, the sweet spot. And that's what action sports is, right? It's that steady progression. Where things get wonky is people think the only progression is into risk, right? I'm going to jump bigger and bigger cliffs. I'm going to base jump off smaller and smaller buildings. Right, or whatever.
Yep.
And you could play those games, but as you pointed out, like you're gonna die. Like we've all lost. I mean, you know what I mean? Those of us in the action sports community, the number of friends who have died is just absurd. And in your sports, more than most. I mean, my friends who I wrote about in Rise of Superman, a bunch of them aren't here anymore.
Yeah, long list.
And are missed, right? Yeah. But so that's a challenging game to play. The people who do it most successfully discover that creativity is a flow trigger. So pattern recognition, when we link two ideas together in a novel way, when that produces a tremendous amount of flow. So, for example, when I'll teach older adults how to park ski because I created a whole flow for longevity program, and every now and again, I mean, I did it around park skiing. You can use the formulas anywhere, but every now and again, we'll take a group of older adults and go and teach them how to park ski, and we're not trying to teach them to go off jumps right away. We're trying to teach them to creatively interpret the terrain features and move their body in novel ways. You get the creative interpretation of terrain features. Oh, I don't have to jump off that 30-foot ramp, but I can use the knuckle and throw a sliding spin 360 over it. It's super safe. Anybody can do it, but it looks really cool. It feels really neat. It's a novel, creative interpretation of the terrain. You stack 3 or 4 of those in a row, you get the same amount of dopamine you got from your high risk, but you've just gotten it safely, right? Or another, by the way, let me give it to you in a different story. This is I tell this story often. This is the first time I figured out flow was hackable, and it was back in the 90s. Do you remember Glenn Plake, the skier with the huge mohawk?
Yeah. I watched tons of his stuff.
Who's in the Oakley poster child, the skier with the huge mohawk.
I had those glasses.
Oh yeah, we all wanted to be Glenn. Glenn's a wild man, really like a sweet man. So I was in Mount Hood 95, 96 with Glenn, and we're on top of the mountain. Like the glacier goes up to a certain point, and then there's the chutes up top, and there's not a whole lot of snow, but there was snow left up top, and it was like September, so we hiked up there and to ski some of the chutes, and they were a lot scarier than when I got up there, I was like, oh shit, oh okay, oh wow, okay, right. And I'm pretty scared, and there's one chute we're about to ski, and Glenn backs up 60 feet and comes blazing down the ridge line and throws an airplane turn. So he goes off a jump and throws a 180-degree turn before he drops into the chute. And afterwards I was like, Glenn, why would you do something dumb and dangerous before we're going to do something dumb and dangerous? What are we doing here? Right. And he said, no, you don't get it. He's like, something about that airplane turn drops me into the zone. So when I land, I'm already in the zone and I can then ski the chute. And what I learned, so we now know that deep embodiment, which is when you engage multiple senses at once, smell, taste, touch, proprioception, vestibular awareness, right? An airplane turn, not only is it a novel sensation, so you get the novelty, but when you're floating, as you guys know from skydiving, everything wakes up because we don't naturally fly, right? So when you fly, all your senses, I mean, it's one of the reasons skydiving is such a fast flow state. It's because of that deep embodiment trigger that's right there. And so Glenn was leveraging deep embodiment and novelty to drop him into flow before he did the scary thing. My point is, when I train younger athletes, I always tell them, don't use risk as a flow trigger. Use novelty, use creativity, use a whole bunch, use the challenge, skills, balance. Take risks once you're in flow. Once you're performing at your best, then you want to crank up the risk level. Don't I can point to, I've broken a lot of bones, as you probably know, and I can point to like 7 or 8 or 9 of them because I was like, oh no, I'll just hit this jump or I'll just do this and I'll be in flow and the day will be great. Well, no, you're going to the freaking hospital, you moron.
The sponsor of today's episode is Great Spirit Farm. Yes. Love having Great Spirit Farm with us, and specifically their ayahuasca microdose tincture. It is a natural MAOI antidepressant and anti-anxiety. Great Spirit Farm describes the feeling as a warm hug. It can help you access deep creativity, flow, intuition, and improve vivid dream recall, which actually has totally been my experience.
So what is exactly in the bottle is the ayahuasca vine itself. So this is a tincture extraction, double extraction tincture that contains the Banisteriopsis caapi vine. Now, the particular vine that this has been extracted from has been growing in Florida now for over 25 years. And the ayahuasca vine does not contain DMT, so that makes this tincture 100% legal in all 50 states.
Yeah, Great Spirit Farm recommends starting with 1 to 3 dropperfuls and increasing your dose gradually from there until you feel the effects. There are no known contradictions with antidepressants, and always check with your doctor and only take as directed.
And what's really great about what Great Spirit Farm is doing is they're making sure that 10% of all the sales are returned to the Shipibo tribe, honoring the medicine's indigenous roots with active reciprocity. Now, if you want to try this tincture out for yourself, you can go to the website. That is ayadose.com, AYADOSE.com, and you can enter our discount code TTJ10 to get 10% off your order. Again, that's ayadose.com and all caps TTJ10 to get 10% off your order. We've got this ironic statement in base jumping that says gainers for safety, right? And it's exactly what you're just talking about, where you're standing on the edge of the building and you're like, I am scared. My physical body is scared right now. And if I send it with this much anxiety inside of me, I'll be tense. And so I'm going to throw a backflip so that I'm relaxed. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to shift the conversation in a slightly different direction now, because this stuff is so useful. We talked a bit, exchanged a few messages about the trauma conversation, because we talk a lot about trauma, psychedelic healing, deeper healing on this show. And you pointed me to Dr. George Bonanno's book and how he does a lot of research on human resilience relative to the conversation around trauma. I know you have thoughts about that, and I'm
You're going to get me in a lot of
wondering...
trouble now. You're going to, because you wanted
Perfect.
hate mail in the comments.
No,
you wanted to guess.
no.
You wanted
Bring
Steven to piss people off.
No, but
Okay.
I want to hear what you, because
Yeah,
I think it's
so-
important, because again, it's like this, I want to hear what you think is important for people to know about the trauma conversation.
Yeah, let's start with, let me back up one step and let's talk about flow's role in this discussion, because and you guys have sort of hinted at all these things, so, and I gotta do it quickly. So 3 weeks ago, we finally got the proof. We've known this forever. Let me take it back a minute. We've known since the 60s that flow underpins happiness, well-being, overall life satisfaction. By the 90s, we started to understand that flow is underneath like meaning and purpose, passion. By the 2000s, they had psychologists had redefined the 3 tiers of happiness available to humans. Flow is baked into the upper 2 tiers in the definition. So we've known this forever. What people have suspected, and I've argued based on what I just told you about the stress relief stuff that we've known about since the 90s, that it's like, well, wait a minute, the inverse has to be true. Flow is so good for mental health, it's got to protect us against the ravages of mental health diseases and disorders and conditions and whatnot. Nobody could prove it. And they finally did with a 10,000 person twin study in Europe. And they found flow is protective against depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, stress-related cardiac conditions. My group, the Flow Research Project, in a paper we published in Neuroscience, Biobehavioral Reviews, it's open access, so you can just find it online. It's called The First Few Seconds of Flow. We proved that flow is neuroprotective against PTSD. It blocks the potentiation of long-term fear memories. Another group, my friend Karina Pfeiffer's group, proved that flow is neuroprotective against burnout. So these are all the major mental health conditions. We also, there's a tremendous amount of anecdotal data, maybe some hard evidence at this point that, like, when you talk about the addictive personalities with action sport athletes, a lot of that is people with, myself included, with a little bit of ADHD, and they're self-medicating with flow, right? And your sides, because you can focus through flow. And so you're right. So there's a ton of that. I was listening, my friend Neil Brennan, who was Dave Chappelle's co-writer for the Chappelle Show, did a thing with Trevor Noah. And Trevor Noah was talking about how all comics use flow to self-medicate for ADHD, right? So he was just talking about it. So there's a whole, like, this is why with Lyme disease I was so depressed. One of the things it did for me is it got me out of my depression. It woke me up. Oh my God, I'm alive again. I like this place. I want to stay, right? Huge. So you talked about that, Jason, right? Totally saves your butt in a sense, one way or another. So you did that. You have to understand that flow has a role in this. Flow has another role. So if you read George Bonanno's work, you know that he's probably the world's greatest expert on trauma, and he has a very different take, and I agree with George, than most of the figureheads in the sort of what I like to call as the cult of trauma. When I talk about the cult of trauma, I have to be very clear. I'm not talking about the fact that we don't have horrific life experiences.
Right.
I'm not talking about the fact that it's real. It happens, and nobody gets out of here alive. It happens to everybody, right? Like, we have hard stuff in our lives. Trauma is a very loaded term. We used to use the term extreme stress, acute stress. Everybody has incidences of acute stress. Trauma is a very specific thing. And we've been led to believe that bad experiences are going to produce deep, long-standing trauma that are going to alter us for life, and there's very little we can do about it. We have to do all this trauma work, and usually we have to go to workshops and spend money and hire coaches, and there's an industry that has been built underneath this. And by the way, I'm a huge fan of psychedelic therapy. I'm a huge fan of some of these other modalities. I'm not trying to dismiss them. What I'm trying to say is that the cult of trauma is dangerous, and it's dangerous for the following reasons. One, it does not fit the data. You have been sold a lie about what George Bonanno will tell you this. Most of us have these high stress, traumatic stress experiences, and we are back to normal in a year and a half. That's everybody across the boards. He was the guy, right? The U.S. government poured billions of dollars into New York after 9/11 because, oh my God, we're going to have PTSD, the citywide, and it's going to shut the city down. And oh my God, what are we going to do? And they never spent a dime because people there wasn't high PTSD. There was some issues with frontline responders that you expected. It was right within normal parameters. And it's because trauma doesn't work that way. Most of us return back to baseline, completely within a year and a half, and we start doing it earlier. When we say trauma gets stored in the body, you're talking really about allostatic load and allostatic overload. And yes, sort of, maybe, but not exactly the way you're being told. So in other words, like if you've ever done, for example, ketamine is really good at releasing drama. If you've ever done ketamine therapy, what you'll find is that like when you talk about releasing drama, it's like it's like a flash of energy that just sort of like the memory pops up. It's got some energy and it just zips through you, and then it's gone, gone, gone. So that's how it sort of works. But here's why it's so dangerous, and this is the thing that I like bugs me to no end. We know, they forget even flow, but it's true for flow, but just basic peak performance. Basic performance. You want to be a high performer of any kind. You want to actually have success in life of any kind. The thing you have to have is an internal locus of control. So we have what's known as a locus control. Am I in control of my life? I've got an internal locus control. Oh no, am I subject to forces outside my control? I have an external locus control, right? If you think your life is subject to conspiracy theories and gods and demons, they're all punishing you all the time, you have an external locus of control. If you are a victim, all this stuff happened to me, that's why I'm so fucked up, I'm a victim. That's what the cult of trauma teaches us. And we share those victim stories. We trauma bond now, and disastrous for two reasons. First reason it is disastrous is it puts us it's a victim mindset. And you have an external locus of control. And here's what happened. It's external locus of control is like the most extreme form of a fixed mindset you can have. Your brain will not even try to get into flow. It will not try to perform at its best. You won't learn from your mistakes. None of those things are going to happen because your brain is like, look, man, you got no control over this shit. I'm not even going to like bother
Right.
give
I
you
won't
the
even
energy.
bother.
I won't bother. Like the
it.
brain is a efficiency engine. It's got a fixed energy budget, uses a ton of energy. It always wants to conserve energy. So if like you're a victim and you've got no power here and you got no control here and it doesn't freaking matter, your brain isn't going to try. It's literally not going to try. So if you're running around telling these trauma stories, and usually people are telling them because they're using them to prove their individuality. It's like a badge of I suffered and look at me, I'm unique. And you're not unique. We all have trauma stories. Every single person I've ever met has gone through their versions of hell. And the one thing we know about emotions is like they all feel the same. So your pain doesn't feel worse than my pain. And you may have been beaten every day of your childhood, and I may just have stubbed my toe at recess. But like inside, it feels the same. So like there's no gradation on like internal psychological pain. It's all the same. So we're all suffering. We've all got that stuff. And if you run around using it as your identity, because and the thing that, the thing that also makes it worse is the minute you like claim one of those identities, and your brain like starts to subdivide us versus them. So you start to think of like trauma people as your people, and it becomes this like reinforcing loop of powerlessness. So that's super difficult, challenging, hard. Like when we work with flow, when people come in really broken psychologically, I often am like, you should probably maybe do psychedelic therapy, go get some, get some mental health help before you do this work. First for a lot of those reasons. So, I have problems that way. And I know how quickly you can overwrite it. Why? Because I always say, this is my joke. It may not be true with you guys, but I always tell people, if you're heartbroken, right? If he or she breaks your heart, go skydiving.
Yeah.
You'll overlay that heartbreak in a second. Right. And the reason is what happens with trauma is like it's like a river, right? Like you've got this drainage for a river and everything flows into it, right? And because it's the most recent wound, and the more you talk about it, the more you live in it, everything goes in that direction. This is how addiction works. This is how, and you have to overwrite it. And flow is how we overwrite it. This is why when you say learning spikes 240 to 500% in flow, flow is, if you think about most of the good experiences in your life, if they're not pegged to a historic date, your wedding, your graduation, right? You're probably remembering a flow state because of how much it sears things into your memory. This is how we overwrite grief. This is how we overwrite trauma. It's one of the ways. You still have to deal with your stuff and process it, but really like you're trying to get to, I feel good, I feel normal, I am functional. And the last thing I want to mention about Banana's work, and then I'll shut up, is his expertise is in resilience. And resilience is very difficult to train because it doesn't have all the subcategories you think you could train to lead up into resilience. It doesn't work that way. In fact, one of the only ways to train resilience is to train flow. And it's because the actual definition of resilience is adaptive flexibility. Whatever the challenge is, I can meet it. I've got some confidence that I can rise to it, right? That's adaptive flexibility. That's how we come back from trauma. And that sort of empowerment comes with flow. And that's what flow gives us. We're performing at our best. So we have more flexibility. Whichever direction we're going in, we're likely to get better results.
So
thank you for going there, seriously, because I do think it's important, right? We want to hear and be engaged in all potential ideas that can help us heal. So if we're positioning
Melanie, I'm going to say something. I'm going to say something. I very rarely say this out loud to people. This is also something I learned the hard way myself. I had a crazy bunch of years when I was younger, right? Difficult, complicated stuff, like all of us. And I spent a really long time like going through college and like the years after college, sort of those were the stories I told, right? And I was reinforcing it and reinforcing it and reinforcing it. And the two things I noticed is one, I was getting more emotionally crazy, not less. It wasn't healing. I was getting worse, right? I was losing self-control. I wasn't gaining self-control. I was losing it. I was feeling worse. And I couldn't improve. Nothing was changing. I came to a point at a certain point where I was like, I'm just going to stop. I didn't know anything about this. I was like 22. I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to stop telling the stories at all, period. Like none of these stories. I'm just going to, for a year and see what happens. I was wildly happy at the end of that year. I was like, all those things went away once I stopped telling the stories and living inside of it and trying to define myself that way. It's just not, the brain wasn't designed to work that way. Like it's not designed to hold on to stuff that long. It's sort of, emotions are messages for action. They're behavioral signals. They're not these huge things that are meant to stay forever. They're behavioral signals meant to be acted on in an instant, right? Let them go. Do the thing, get on to the next one. Don't hold on to this for 30 years.
Right.
This is a
I
lot.
have one more comment, but I'm going to let Jason talk for a second because he's
you're
touching
on. You got we're in everything that I spent my whole life around, right? Like the day to day, minute to minute, hour to hour is all into this. So I'm going to touch on one thing, and I'm going to jump back into a previous part, and that was that emotions being a call to action. That sounds like the hunter-gatherer kind of part of the brain where we've changed our society and the way that we work and operate so much now that we don't move in the world of nature the way that we used to. We're in this like time exists way into our past and time exists way into our future. We're not living in our present moment. We're living in this expansive version of consciousness, which is a lie. It is not real. We like this whole idea of like allowing our emotion to be anxiety about something that hasn't happened yet, or holding on to a fear or trauma or whatever, that's something that was in our past being part of our present. So I want to put a full stop on that and just push it to the side. And I want to jump back to optimizing. You got onto a topic and you touched my happy spot, which is my career as a professional athlete, champion athlete, and also diving into consciousness. Always wanting to optimize and wanting to find those hacks and looking for those ways, like how can I biohack engineer my way into the best version of myself? Not only that, but one who can stand living with myself, one who can be okay just being here. And in The Art of Impossible, you recommended an exercise about reaching out to trusted friends groups and asking for your weaknesses, looking for the points in your personality and character.
Weaknesses,
yeah. So I did that because that's the kind of shit that I've always done when it comes to my athletic performance, my everything that I do, my business. And I'm like, you know what? I've been doing character diving for a long time now, and I'm going to go to my personal board of directors, which I established a few years back, to help me on that specific mission. And I posed that question, and I got the 2 to 3 points of feedback from each of the 6 people that I polled. And it was incredible how diverse the feedback was. And I was looking for the trend, as nerdy people do.
Right.
Like,
you want to look for the 2 or 3 things. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, I want that 1 or 2 that are like the main thing. And I found it, but it was hard because the feedback was so individualized, and much of it was a personal projection of our individual relationship and so like pieces that were related.
Jason, and one of the disadvantages I've had in how I think about stuff is I've had the advantage of being a writer for my whole life and working with hundreds of editors and a lot of my friends. And what I've learned along the way is like when anybody gives you feedback, you got to be able to take them and put them to the side. Their feedback doesn't matter. I always say when somebody comes to me and says, okay, this paragraph in this chapter sucks, here's why. I believe them when they tell me the paragraph sucks. Something's broken in the paragraph. Their reason for why, probably not right. They probably haven't a clue. They have their personal opinion about why it's broken. I did something dumb in the writing that kicked the reader out and it broke. And when they went to look for it, they find themselves.
Yep.
The paragraph is probably wrong, right? That's a huge, I've had that advantage, and it's often for people with this kind of exercise, right? It's like, you got to sort of wade through your friends. Like, they love you, but they've got like the reasons they're pissed at you are very specific. And it's like 70% about them, 30% about you. And you want to like find the links between like all the 30% about you, right? It's a little tricky, but it's damn useful when you can do it.
Well, I found it in obsessiveness was the key thing that like, maybe back off on that obsessiveness that's kind of been an asset your whole life, but maybe it overrules things a little too much. Interesting experiment. So thank you for the offer on that exercise.
Nice.
It was invaluable, and
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. That's so great.
Yeah.
I also kind of want to ask about, and this is totally divergent, but you have a very passionate about the work you do with dogs. I mean, and that's probably not something people ask you about. Maybe they ask you about it all the time. I don't know, but I'd love to hear more about that, just because it seems like a very personal, from your heart thing. Tell us more about why you do that.
I'm an animal geek. I think a part of your life should be service. I just do. I think you need a part of your life should always be service, and I felt that for a long time. And I also felt, for me, I'll be real honest with you, I came out of like this punk rock art community, and I watched a bunch of people sort of get famous or well known or whatever. And I knew as a writer, I was going to have, like, that had to be my career path. If I wanted to make a living, right, people were going to have to know my name. Like, that was like, you can't sell books if you don't have an audience, right? So I knew I was going to be in that world. And I watched a bunch of people I was very close to get well known, get famous, get whatever. And, like happens, a bunch of them turned into jerks. And I was just like, and now I have more sympathy and understanding. And I get why that happens. And I understand it's very protective and it's a really weird experience and all that stuff. But all I knew at the time is I was like, if you got to go this way and you already believe part of your life is service, you better do something to like keep yourself humble, because you don't want to turn into an asshole. Like, I just, you know what I mean? I watched friends lose all their friends. And I was like, I don't want to be that guy. That sucks. So I was like, I want service because it's humbling. It reminds you and all that stuff. And for a while, I ran a really cool thing with the LA Lakers and Dave Egger's organization called the Reporters Gym. We taught inner city kids how to be sports writers. It was awesome, except for the fact that you can't put me with teenagers. And either
why not?
I'm a teenager, because I'm essentially a teenager. I don't have
because you are. I
don't have the I'm not childproof. I don't have kids of my own. I will say the wrong thing. I will tell too much of the truth. I will make moms really angry. I always tell parents, don't bring your children around me. They're like, no, you're being cute. You're being funny. I'm like, no, you don't understand. No. I'm gonna put my foot in my mouth. I'm gonna do something that you're gonna hate me forever. Don't do that to me. Seriously. So
I feel like
I was in this weird situation where we're trying to train work with teenagers, and I don't know how to be like, I'm trying to be an authority figure and I'm coming off as a
Right.
jerk and it's awkward and I'm bringing my friends in to help. And I met my wife and she was running a dog rescue and she had a bunch of dogs and I had been an animal geek my whole life. I'd loved animals. I used to report on primatologists and like all kinds of like anything excuse I could get to go to Africa or the Amazon to hang out with scientists who were hanging out with animals. That was me for a long time on top of doing the action sports writing and stuff like that. I did that a lot in early my journalism career, and I was like, oh my god, I can do service with animals and like in my home. Like I don't even have to leave my right now. I had no freaking clue what I was getting into, but that turned into Rancho de Chihuahua, which my wife and I ran for 15 years in Chihuahua, New Mexico, which was we built a dog hospice care dog special needs dog sanctuary in the
No.
poorest county in America with the highest incidence of animal cruelty, and lived on the front lines for 15 years. And when we couldn't do that anymore because we had burned out on being on the front lines, they kicked me out of the Peace Corps after 10 years, and we stayed 15. And that so now we've got a scaled down version. We still do hospice care. So we've probably,
Wow.
I don't know, over the course of our lifetime, it's probably been close to 1,000 dogs that we've gotten the privilege to work with who have passed through the facility.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yeah, I know an uncomfortable amount about grief because if you're doing
Me
hospice
too.
care and a
Yeah.
thousand dogs pass through the facility, right? And I love all of them. So I've learned uncomfortable lessons about grief that I don't think any human being needs to actually know. But I love the work. I love the dogs. And by the way,
I love it.
it's very flowy, right? Like that was how and
Yeah.
Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, and I met because I've been working on flow. I've been working on the neurobiology of flow. He was in psychology. I didn't even know him. I knew a whole bunch of other people. I knew about the psychology work, but that wasn't what I was doing. I was solving a different puzzle. And then I started doing dog rescue and I'd go like running my dogs or hiking my dogs. And I started to realize we were getting group flow together. And I was in a flow
Mm.
state with the dogs. And I was like, well, is that even possible? Like what? And that's why I got Csikszentmihalyi's email at somebody gave, I don't know how I got it. I emailed them and I was like, I'm seeing this really weird thing. And could it even possibly make us terrified? Like, could this maybe be true? And like, please don't hate me. And I don't want to sound crazy, but I think I'm getting in flow with my dogs. And he emailed me back. He's like, Steve, it was something like he had read my book, or it was just like, Steven, I get into flow with my dog all the time. Call me if you ever want to talk about it. And that was how
I
we met.
love that.
Right. So I actually
Ugh.
met Mike through like dog work. And, and we're in, it's still part of, we use flow to heal the dogs because it boosts the immune system. It boosts the immune system. If you're interested in longevity, I wrote a whole book about it and I do a whole course on flow for longevity because it's
Yeah.
foundational to those kinds of things as well. So it's really great with the dogs and it's really easy to drop. Dogs are like kids. They're flow prone, right? They're not in the state
Oh, I
all the
love
time, but it's really easy to kick them into flow if you know what you're doing.
Amazing. Jay, I know you have some more questions, so I want to give you a chance to jump in. I can always jump in.
Well, I wanted to bring up one other part of Art of Impossible with the section on Sasha on Alexander Shulgin, and it was just
You
such
mean
a
stealing fire? Stealing fire,
sorry.
right?
Stealing
Okay.
fire. Thank you. Yeah.
I was like, Sasha, who's this Sasha in
Yeah.
Art of Impossible?
So, Alexander Shulgin, of course, the godfather of neurochemistry, alteration of neurochemistry in the modern age, and the MDMA being one of his greatest contributions to the world of psychedelics. And I'm listening to your audiobook and just loving it because I'm deeply invested in the story myself. I've got Tikal on my shelf. I've known his story and for such a long time. And I really appreciated the depth and detail of the time taken to iterate and help to bring that into the forefront of modern culture's ears and eyes to absorb more of this story and the relationship to Burning Man. I'm a longtime burner, and I happen to be camped at my first year, I camped in the same camp with Alexander Shulgin and met Anne and Sasha.
No big deal.
No big deal, right? And I'm this kid, however old I was at the time, but just completely over. I got on a scissor lift to ride up a scissor lift as you do at the burn, and just look around, and on steps Sasha and Anne, and I'm like, I know, hello, you're Sasha. Let me shake your hand and thank you for for opening my heart. And this is where I wanted to like kind of bring this back together, is that the MDMA experience and flow of accessing the emotional body through this heart opening experience in a way where there were like limiters on the version of me that was like, I ain't talking about that. I'm not okay with this. This part of me is not all right to be there. And that compound completely changed my version of who I am. And I feel indebted to both Alexander, Sasha, for his work, and to the compound itself for opening up a whole world that I didn't know existed as far as my emotional experience, emotional body. And I wanted to see if you wanted to say anything around those types of access.
I can go in any. I mean, do you want a personal story? Do you want like me to talk about
I
the
do.
neurobiology?
I want a personal story.
Psychedelics?
I want a personal story.
I want a personal story.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I had a MDMA was a wild experience for me. So do you want a slightly longer personal story? I'll just tell you the story.
If you have time, we have time.
So I didn't drink or do drugs from the time I was like 17 to the time I was 21, because I watched a lot of friends die, and bad things happened to people I loved. And everybody got sober, and I just like, I went to, I didn't do anything. And then it was my last year in college, and I did MDMA for the first time. And let's just say that this was early on in the MDMA days, and it wasn't quite illegal. It wasn't really legal. And let's just say a bunch of friends of mine who will remain nameless bought 1.5 pounds from a chemist in Oregon and had parties and sold it. But they weren't drunk guys. They didn't know what they were doing. So they were packing. First of all, they got pure MDMA, and they were packing capsules. They didn't know how much powder to put in. And by the time they were packing like the thousandth one, they were high as kites, because they had never, they forgot to put gloves on. And these were 20-year-old idiots, not like people who knew what they were doing. And so I ended up, the first time I took MDMA, I ended up taking the equivalent of about 16 hits of pure pharmaceutical MDMA. And when I came down, so what it did for me is, I don't experience love the way most people feel it. I don't feel that emotion the way most people feel it. And one of the reasons I know this is because I took MDMA and I went, oh shit, that's what love feels like. And when it went away, it made me nearly suicidal for like 6 months, because I was like, I only wanted to be on MDMA. And I'm not really an addictive person. And I was like, I don't want to live on drugs, but I don't want to come off this drug. Like, I don't know what to do. And it really messed me up. But I'm very grateful to it, because it's really helped me sort of learn to figure out, oh, this is what love feels like. This is what this is what it's like in your body. This is how, and I've gotten better at working with that particular emotion. But you're a little bit on certain spectrums, and that's certain emotions are cut off for you. And that's one that was sort of cut off for me. And I think I buried a lot of it because of stuff that happened in my younger years as well. So MDMA was really wonderful for that. And I've known Rick Doblin at MAPS since the 90s as well. And so I've worked with Rick on, I worked on the drug war as a journalist.
Yeah.
Right. I wrote early articles about psychedelic therapy. It was the same mission. Rick and I knew each other because we were both trying to bring altered states of consciousness for reasons of healing and performance to the center of the mainstream. And we both had the same, Rick Doblin, myself, there's a lot of us, Richie Davis in the University of Wisconsin, all of us were we had all seen what Tim Leary and the folks in the 60s had done. And we knew some stuff that other people didn't know, which is it was really easy to dismiss Leary and some of this stuff, but they started out as real scientists doing like really good work, and there was a lot of really great work that got done that like the mainstream culture and all of the FDA and whatnot, they just like were able to dismiss. And we were like, okay, we can't have that happen again. So how do you do this work in a way that is like slow and safe and steady? And like it was like we were trying to sell like con the mainstream. It wasn't even like it wasn't even trying to con the mainstream. We were like very slowly like we're going to prove this by
Yeah.
research. We're going to like none of us are particularly patient. Well, Richie Davidson is, and Rick actually Doblin is. They're more patient than I am, but like even I knew I was like, okay, we're going to go one study at a time, one book at a time. I wrote 9 books on flow or something along the, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like thousands of articles, so many experiments and science and whatnot. And Rick did the same thing with psychedelics. Richie Davidson did with meditation. You know, my mentor Andy Newberg did it with other spiritual experiences. Like this was, I don't want to say it was a concerted, like it wasn't a conspiracy. We didn't sit down and come up with a secret plot to how to like mainstream altered states as technologies of healing and performance. But like it was the same mission. And it was a whole bunch of people who was like, holy shit, how do we convince people that this stuff is real and important and can be hugely beneficial?
Yeah. I'm curious what you're working on now that has you excited. You know what I mean? So like, is it more of the same, or is there new stuff I mean, maybe you can't share about it, but
Oh,
I'm
I know. I
curious.
mean, so I can talk about, so my research, this is not going to be surprising to you because I wrote about it. If you read West of Jesus, I write about this in West of Jesus. I write about it again in Stealing Fire and in Rise of Superman. There's a very deep relationship between flow and intuition, right? In Rise of
Sure.
Superman, I tell the base jumping story about Dean Potter, who I'm sure you knew
Yep.
before he passed,
It's a good
where
friend.
he talks about the voice of intuition being cranked up. So we've known anecdotally since the 90s that flow now it turns up the volume on intuition. We can hear our intuition, we can read it more, and it seems to make it clearer, more accurate, right? Intuition isn't always right, and flow seems to turn that up. And why is that? And is that real? And so we've been working on I just it hasn't been accepted, but we submitted 2 papers, one to Nature, one to some place, Neuroscience, Biobehavioral reviews. Maybe one is on the neurodynamics of intuition, one is on uh, the neurodynamics of flow and intuition, how they work together. Starting to work on a book on intuition and flow. So
Cool.
that's front end. I'm also working on another book on technology with Peter Diamandis, and we've
Nice.
there's always a bunch of studies going on, but intuition is sort of like this has been a lifelong quest, right?
Yeah.
West of
Yeah.
Jesus, which was the first book I wrote about flow in early thousands. I've talked about flow states and flow, how it amplifies experiences of synchronicity, and why is that serendipity, flow? What's the difference between flow and luck? These are long-standing questions that have been floating around, and we've started to make some headway. We've really got a handle on intuition and really understanding how intuition works and how to make it more practical and useful and why it works better in flow. So it's starting
Yeah.
that research it's early days, but we're starting to get there. It's the same sort of thing. It's the same like weird altered state phenomenon of
Yeah.
consciousness that is sort of hard to study
Totally.
and usually important. Everybody knows it, but like, and it turns out that a lot of the things that we sort of help pioneer in flow science, we meaning the Flow Research Collective and our way of thinking about problems, was useful and applicable in the field of intuition. And by we, like I've been lucky enough to work on this with some of like the smartest neuroscientists on the planet, and I still like. I've also got the leverage of like incredibly big, scary brains to help with this work, and that's been really fun.
Isn't that fun? Yeah.
I love that. I love how you talk about when you listen to a book, you get to access years of a person's brain power, flow, the effort that you've made when you read a book versus when you read an article, the comparative
Oh, the
value that
ROI on
comes in
reading. Yeah,
consuming
the
that.
ROI.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked that. I mean, we could go on and on for sure. I'm sure. I can't let this interview go by without giving a tip of the hat to Inktober, which is just a weird, delightful thing that I do with my artist community. And I saw that you did it last year at least as well. And I was always delighted by your, strange little drawings. And I'm doing my stick figures and stupid thought bubbles. So
I got really sick halfway through the month and I couldn't finish. I got like a horrible flu I got really, really ill. And I was really bummed because I had a great streak going. It was like day 17, right?
We'll get into it again
the
next year.
The other thing is this, like, I wasn't, I started to draw 2 years ago, right? I have a degree in art from way back in the day, like a minor in fine art. And
I don't think I knew that.
Nobody really does, but I ran between college and grad school, I, with 19 friends, helped co-run Antimatter, which was the largest performance art and video gallery on the planet at the time. It was at 17th and Cap in San Francisco. It was on Devil's Corner, which is why 19 people could afford a warehouse. But it was really cool. So I spent a bunch of time working in and around art, and I just always liked life drawing.
Yeah,
and was never great at it. And Chicks at Me High told me to find some non-risk-based high flow activities as I age.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. He was like, you really have to back your shit up, Steven.
Age.
Yeah, as you age. Yeah, he was.
Nice.
He was. Well,
Thanks,
yeah. Well, I'd asked him about mountaineering and rock climbing and its role in flow science, and he basically said, "Look, dude, the biggest mistake I ever made is like I never backed up my highest flow activities. Like I'm 80 years old, I can't get out of bed, I can't go rock climbing, I can't go mountaineering, right? And he was flow deprived, and he told me, he warned me, and I was like, oh, I can't pluck my meat carcass off cliffs my whole life on skis. I need something, right? And I actually, going into park skiing was actually, it sounds really strange, but like park skiing is a way to creatively interpret the terrain, and like it gave me more avenues than just big mountain skiing. So that was part of that. And then I started to teach myself to draw, and Inktober was about a year and a half into my drawing career. I didn't quite have the skills yet. I still probably don't, but I didn't really have the skills yet to create a drawing a day under time pressure. Also, it's hard.
Totally. I just wanted to tell you because it was delightful, and it was
I'm going to do it again this year.
Point.
Yeah, I'll do it again.
Yeah,
I think I might join you guys and try that.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as a touch point.
I loved your illustrations last year, Melody. It was inspiring.
Thanks.
Having those flow states that are non-life threatening. For me, I've found things like playing music. I've been DJing since 2000, so 24 years now. And the mix of intuition as a element in that, I don't know a lot of time, I don't know what's coming next. And part of the body just knows right away. And especially there's this relationship to vibration, sound, energy, and being, I'm in the vibe, I'm sharing something, and I'm rolling through my collection of music, and I'm like, what's coming next? What's the next thing? And the intuition just goes that and grabs it and pulls it out, immediately knows where it goes and what to do with it. And I've even had so much of an experience which blew my mind, which was to watch my hand reach over and turn a knob and know that I did not think about that action. I observed it happening from an outside perspective. I don't even know what knob I just grabbed, but my body knew where to go and what to do intuitively while in that flow state. And it blew my mind. And I'd like to hear a few more examples. Could you take us to some other potential ways for us to access flow that are not the action sports adventures that we've all been kind of hooked on,
yes,
Please.
Forever.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thank
you.
Yeah. Creativity. You're right. Creativity is your friend, right? Creativity is your friend. The other thing is this, and I think it's super core. And, as athletes, you got to switch sports, right? You got to start over even if you end up coming back to your core sport, right? Skiing's been my core sport my whole life, but I spent 8 years as a rock climber. Heavy, right? Heavy as my primary sport. I spent 10 or 12 years as a surfer as my primary sport. I was a windsurfer. I've been a skater. You know what I mean? Like, I always come back and then I mix up the primary sports. So because if you just drill down in one thing, sure, if you have a professional career and that's what you're doing, but like once you're coming out of that, you know, Laird Hamilton was always the best at this, right? And that like all the things he's invented, foiling, stand-up pedal, all these things are basically him trying to find ways to get flow that don't always involve 100-foot waves. Because there's
Right.
some days that's really great, but there are days where that's not the safest way to right. And so I think like we get stubborn because you get like obsessive, especially about, oh, I got to get better. I've got to get better. I get better. One, you forget that lateralizing into a wild ass sideways sport is going to make you better at your core sport anyways. Like it's going to, some
Right.
stuff is going to start translating back in. It always does. You'll get new kinds of vestibular awareness or balance or, you know, stuff like that will show up. So there's cross training always seems to work on some level. And, so I think there's a lot of value in that sort of stuff. I think there's a tremendous amount of value in picking up one or two creative activities. I have drawing. The next thing I already have a piano set up in my office next door.
Cool.
That's the next thing
I've
I'm
been
going.
dancing. Skiing is I'm like newly obsessed with, even though I've been doing it about 10 years. I'm just like, now I do it every year a lot, as much as I can. So it's like that
I'm actually
crossover.
hip hop dancing is my next.
Yeah.
I'm healing a broken MCL, or a new MCL. I've got a shiny new MCL.
And dance it back
it's
into
lovely.
health. That's how you fix it.
No,
Yep.
I can't dance it back into health. Not quite yet. I have to wait. I'm not allowed to not even allowed to jump. Right. Like I'm gonna pitch count, right? I'm not allowed to squat more than 135. I can go to the plates, but no more. And you know.
Yeah.
Well, Steven, is there anything that we have not asked you about that you're like really want to make sure you share about, whatever we might have missed, or just anything that you want to share?
We covered everything. I don't have nothing. I mean, if you want to, you know, you're gonna tell people where to find me.
Yes,
in the show notes.
Well, that's of course the next thing is how can people connect with you?
Anybody, by the way, if anybody's interested in training flow with the Flow Research Collective, we're very good at making flow reliable and repeatable. And the website getmoreflow.com is your friend. So check us out there. You can sign up for essentially a free hour-long information coaching call. Learn about us. Learn if it's right for you. Whatever. Most people get a lot out of those calls anyways. So have fun. Getmoreflow.com. Check us out online.
Getmoreflow.com.
Steven Kotler. At Steven Kotler on social. Hit me up. Say hello.
Awesome.
I love it.
I'm really looking forward to the book on intuition. I think that's going to be one that I'm like going to dive into because that's been like a deep, powerful mission in my life is to listen to that intuition all the time. And that's been the whole reason this show exists. That's why I'm sitting here at this desk right now.
That's
not all the time, by the way, not all the time. If you are having intuitions about anything that you might consider instinctive, like basic needs, money, sex, food, those kinds of things, we tend to get those wrong. Flow can help with that stuff, but we tend to get them wrong. We know this. Everybody's had this experience. Oh, Melanie, you've looked across the bar a long time ago. Oh, he's really cute. He's really hot for me. And he hasn't been at all. Or she's really hot for me. And you go over and say hello, and she's not at all. You had the intuition, right? Or the one that happens to all of us all the time is, oh, I'm so fucking hungry. I'm going to order X, Y, and Z. I can eat all of it. And it shows up in we have whole, eyes are bigger than your stomach. We have words for this experience. And it's because when you have basic needs, unless you have real expertise, basic needs will block intuition. So there are really one of the things that's really sort of cool about a lot of the intuition research is we're starting to learn, here's how you train it. Here's how you there's feed and caring of intuition, There's training of intuition, and there's places to be wary of intuition. And we're getting a really good map of all of that. And there's probably a way to start working with your intuition. Like, okay, one example is when we're in flow, our cognitive biases get diminished. So our cognitive biases, as Daniel Kahneman discovered, block a lot of our intuition. They diminish in flow. They also diminish if you have good interoceptive skills. So you can improve your intuition by counting your heartbeats.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, God, new things to practice.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Steven.
Not while I'm doing, West Coast swing dancing.
I've so thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I feel like we could hang out and have a great time together and go on some adventures and get in trouble. I look forward to speaking to you again, and I want to thank you so much for carving out the time to be part of the Trust journey.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you, Stephen. Truly. Same.
This was fun.
I'm being myself, throwing heart hands.
Thanks so much.
That's what this is?
Yeah. Okay, let's all do it.
I always thought it was two C's trying to eat each other. But people are actually, this is the heart. It's not like two Pac-Men trying to kill each other. I was so confused.
Teaching you about love. Yeah, love right there. Thank you so much.
Guys. It was super fun hanging out. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, seriously, for listening, for spending your valuable, valuable time, energy, and heart with us. Every bit of it makes a difference.
Yeah, thank you. We would love it if you could show your support for the show by subscribing on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, or follow us on Instagram. You can always click the like button, leave us a comment, or share an episode with somebody directly.
Like we mentioned, every month we host integration coaching circles. So much good work is happening there. You are invited to join us. Go to trustthejourney.today/integration. The Trust the Journey family includes these integration coaching circles and our private Facebook group where we connect and support each other. Join us by going to our website, trustthejourney.today, and click the orange Patreon button.
Yeah, thanks. It's your support and engagement that make the show possible. Thank you. We're here to connect with you. Feel free to DM us anytime on Instagram. We're at trustthejourney.today. Thank you. We love you.
We love you.
Keep laughing, keep loving, and keep trusting the journey.